All right, good morning, everybody. Everybody hear me clearly? Awesome. So thank you all for showing up. I know it's very early in the morning after a pub crawl and all that fun stuff, but hopefully you're not terribly hungover. My name is CCP Stillman, also known as Charlie Erickson in real life. And I'm an associate QA tester. I work on the API, amongst other things, like testing all these guys' stuff they do, which is a lot of fun. My main focus is the API and making sure that when we release things that they work, which they do most of the time, but there's obviously times when they don't, and somebody has to make sure that actually gets fixed. Today we're going to talk about the Eve API, what you can use it for, things like that, and it's just going to be a 101. So if you're not familiar with the API at all, or if you've got some basic sense of what it is, chances are you're in the right place. But we're going to go through it all, and when you're done here, hopefully you'll be able to build some simple applications with the API and put them to good use in New Eden. So once I'm done with this, CCP Atlas over here, he's going to be doing the final dev track lecture, which is basically going to be putting all the things we have learned over, well, the last 24 hours together, like with the static data dump, the image export, the in-game browser, and creating a really neat application. I can see he's working on it right now. It's really awesome, actually.
It's almost done.
It hasn't been tested as well, so I'm not going to take responsibility. And yeah, basically, you know, it would be awesome if once we're done here, you could start developing your own applications. It's not rocket science. It's just a question of getting to know it a little bit and then taking it on from there, which is a bit intimidating, but you'll get there eventually. So the question is, what is the API, first of all? You might be familiar with this application over here. It's Evemon. It's like a really cool application to monitor your skill training. It's been around for like ages, basically since before the API even came. It's, I guess it's kind of the inspiration that was the API was developed on. And it's been developed on quite a lot. And then we have eBoard, which is the kind of the web kind of character sheet, show-off kind of thing, which is actually really fun to look at, see what people are training. Then we have other types of applications which use the API. Here we have an asset manager, so you can also get asset data from the API. You can get, of course, from your characters, you can get kind of information about your skills, how they might affect your ship. This is EFT, very famous application. We also have mobile versions of these programs, which really rock. I love my iPhone and looking at my character training all the time and wake up in the morning finding that my skill isn't training. It happens. And then people obviously finding really creative ways of using the API. One you might have noticed if you are in an alliance, when you join some kind of cooperation alliance, you have to sign up for forums, voice communications. And the funny thing is that people actually found ways to use the API for authentication to those. So you put in your API key and all that, and it will verify that you're actually in that alliance. Pretty neat stuff. The question is, now that we've seen what they could be used for, I mean, API is a three-letter word. Well, it's an acronym. What does it mean? So from Wikipedia, we have some definitions on it, and the last one here is actually the most appropriate one for the Eve API. It's not a library you get from us. That would be nice, but it's a lot of work. What we're offering is actually basically a language-independent way of doing remote procedure calls. So you call some procedure on our web server, generates all the data for you, and returns it to you. Very simple. And that's really what a lot of third-party applications base themselves on now. Being able to present you some kind of live data from the Tranquility cluster and allowing you to interact with this somehow or use it to maybe get a small edge in New Eden, which is what everybody wants. So yeah, it's a way of querying data from the live Tranquility cluster. And it's, of course, one of the cornerstones of the third-party development economic ecosystem. Amongst other, as you have seen yesterday, the static data export, the image export, and the in-game browser, which are all, when put together, can create some really powerful applications, like the ones I just showed earlier. So first off, we basically, just going to jump right into it. And we're going to see how you actually query the API, which turns out to be fairly simple. So, no, don't care. So, first off, you need to query the API somehow. The way that the API works is actually it's just a kind of a web application that runs on our servers, meaning that you can actually go and query it in the browser. So you can go, not HTTP, there we go. Okay, and then you the application lives on api.eveonline.com. From then on, I'll show you some sample URLs you can use, but the most simple one you can take is the server status. So we need to go to the server folder, and then under there lives an object called server status, and it's an XML document. And then because we use ASP.NET, you have to suffix it with ASPX. And then you can see, in fact, what it returns is a result from the API. You might be able to tell. You can see, in fact, the result is that the server is open, as you'd expect at this time of day. And there is about 30,000 players online. So we have the very first piece of data from the API. There's, of course, more complex ways of getting to it. But this is a simple one. So going back, again, this is the simple way of doing it. There is a lot of things you can get from the API. All these calls, they are basically sort of like static data that doesn't belong to a specific character. So you can see you have things like an alliance list, the certificate tree. You can convert character names and IDs. You can get some factional warfare statistics, the full skill tree rather than, well, you should really be using the static data export, but you can get it there if you need to. And again, some calls that doesn't require, it's not tied to a character. And I'm going to explain keys a little bit later. But you can get a list of all factional warfare systems. And then there is some statistics about jumps and serenity you can actually get, which I know some really cool websites use to show some really awesome statistics and graphs. Then next up is all of the important ones for most people. It's the what you really want to use the API for. It's all the character-specific data that your user sort of wants, like Evemon, the asset manager. They use these things here to present live data. So you can see we have, for instance, up here the asset list, the character sheet, contact list. You can get all your kill mails, market orders, notifications, your wallet. There's a lot more to it than all this here. It just fit onto the slide. So you're going to have to read the documentation for the full list of things, and as well for the corporation. This is like a really small subset, but there's a lot of overlap. Sorry?
Sorry.
Yes.
I'm just having a go. There was a word that you said there that you've got to read something.
It was a CCP swear word beginning with
DOC.
Yeah.
We're going to talk to him about that.
Sorry.
It doesn't exist, I'm sorry. I was lying. No, it actually does. Anyway, so yes, getting back on track. The corporation data, there's a lot of overlap between corporation and characters, so I'm not listing them all. But the corporation-specific calls, the most important ones are like your member security list, which is like who people are, the outpost list, your POSs and titles. And then we recently added in, I think it was like Tyrannosaur recursion, ways of getting your account status, so you can see how long you paid for your account for. So when you're about to run out, your third-party application can actually say, hey, you need to apply a Plex or something like that. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to log in. It's really nice when you use Plex. And then one you're going to be seeing in just a little bit is the characters page, which is a way of getting a list of all characters on your account. Now, a lot of these calls are slightly different in the way that you can interact with them. We have the system of full and limited API key. The full key might give itself a little bit by the name. It's basically a way of getting everything. Then we have the limited key, which is the intention was that you could give a little bit of information that would be useful enough that it doesn't compromise your privacy or anything like that. It turns out that there's a lot of information that people want from the API now, as we've added onto it, making it a bit more risky to give out. We're going to change that in the future. Soon, hopefully. TM. But yeah, it's all going to change in the future. Fuck yeah. And if this thing works. So we've seen how to get some very simple data. We just talk about the different types of keys, and I guess it's time to try and see how we might actually get like character-specific data and authenticate it with the API. Oh, sorry. So the first thing we need to do, in fact, to do this is that we need our API key. The API key can be retrieved from eveonline.com/API. And no worry if you cannot find it eventually. Oh God, somebody closed the browser. I'm going to have to look at my phone really quickly to find username and password.
Charlie, is it my account?
Yes.
Just log in.
Well, there you go.
Later, dude.
Okay, so you get to the API key management page. And from there on, you're going to see we have 2 yellow boxes. The first one is the limited access API key. And you can see it allows access to character sheet and skill training information only. It's slightly out of date. You get more now. And you're going to see the user ID and the API key, which is the 2 pieces of information you're always going to need for authenticated calls. And then, of course, you have the full key. It has like small, scary red letters. And you need to take that seriously. Very seriously. You don't want your API keys to be leaking out, especially if you're like a big alliance lead or something like that. Could end terribly funny. Drama for the win. So yeah, so let's start by getting a key. We're just going to start by using the limited access key. So now it's going to get a bit tricky. We're going to have to copy paste a lot. So stay with me. So we go to api.eveonline.com, and we're just going to remove this part here. What we're going to be interested in now is the character sheet. So we need to go to the character folder, shortened to char. Makes no sense. Then we go to character sheet. And again, it's an XML document, and it's served by ASPX. OK, so if you just go here, you'll get a nice thing here saying, you need to provide some kind of user ID parameter for authentication. All right, fair enough. So this keyboard. So we need to provide user ID. Shit, that's not going to work. So query strings, very important. Does anybody here not know what a query string parameter is, or how to put them together? Awesome. So I'm just going to type it out rather than explain it. So we need the user ID. Let's explore. Fuck. I'm screwed. I think I'm just going to actually take this URL into Notepad.
So simple.
Yes. OK, so we take the user ID. All right, and then we need the API key. Again, this is just something you'll have to remember that these are the parameter names you need to use. It's also in the word I shall not mention. All right, so now we have a URL which you can use to access the API. So let's try and plug it in and see that I didn't fail. I did. So it turns out that, in fact, when you want to access a character sheet, you actually do need a character ID. So let's go and fetch that. I mentioned in the slide I just showed, this one here. Nope, this one. That on the account folder, there is one called characters.xml. That's going to give you a list of all your characters. And it's, in fact, also going to give you a list of the IDs you need to provide. So if we change this over to account, and we go to the characters page, you're going to see here we have a nice list of characters. And what we're interested in is this here, which is the character ID. So we're going to copy paste this and then change this URL back. All right, and then we're going to go over here and append the character ID. And what you'll find is that we're actually going to get a result now. Of course, it's not going to be the way you're going to present it to the user, this thing here. You're going to pass it somehow. But you can see we get some very basic information about our character. For instance, the name of it, when it was created, things like the wallet balance, what kind of clone you have, and you're going to get a list of all the skills which is attached to this character. So some very basic information we've got here. And of course, there is a lot of other information you can get, but this is the very simple way of getting to it. And you can, of course, try and explore a bit around the different pages. And if it turns out it needs more data, it's going to tell you so. There's a lot of calls, especially on the character sheet, that are going to require you to provide some sort of data from a previous call. For instance, when you use the mail messages call, you're only going to get the headers from it. So you'll need to take the IDs from this thing to get the bodies of the information. But that's something to kind of experience when you get there. So fast forward. There we go. So the next thing is trying to understand the basic layout of a call. So we have again the server status call we saw a bit earlier. And the XML is not terribly complex. You can see we have the EV API root element here. We have the current time. It's the current server time of the cluster. We have a result here, which all result is basically going to be in. Then we have this thing down here. Very important. The way the API used to be, if you requested some data before you were allowed to, which is, it says here when you're allowed to call again, you're just going to get an error. Now that we have implemented a memcache solution and actually caching things, which is a bonus, you'll get the same data again. The thing is that there's really no need for calling it again if you already got the data. You need to cache it somehow. If you keep doing this, chances are that some people will not be happy. I mean, the API is a very heavy way of getting to data. Depending on what you actually call, for instance, we have some ways of getting names of different things that Unna PrismX mentioned yesterday. You don't want to get that from the API always, and if you get it every time, it's going to be it's a very bad user experience to have to wait for that kind of thing. If you go insane, and I know things happen in code where all of a sudden it just goes batshit insane. It's not going to be very nice, and to kind of help you, we're going to block your access to the API until things get fixed, as a friendly reminder that something might be broken. But it's not something to worry about as long as you do not really go absolutely insane on the API. Something to think about, but probably it's not going to be an issue at first. But once you get into very high, large amounts of data, I know that some people do experience that maybe their way of querying the API becomes a bit excessive. And it's something that with the static data export and the thing that Atlas is going to be showing you, that there's definitely ways that are going to improve the user experience of the application. That's also going to improve the performance and the amount of data you're going to get from the API. Next thing, this is a scary one. So when you are developing a third-party application, a lot of times you're going to be requesting user input. User input is very scary. You should never trust it. But still, you might just say, hey, I got this key. What am I going to do with it? I'm going to try and query the API. But for some reason, this thing happened. What does that mean? I'm just going to try again. I'm sure that'll work. Repeat that over again. Not a good idea. Again, it's really just heating your CPU unnecessarily. And we know that's not really a good thing because they get hot as it is. And your user might not like it, hogging up the bandwidth. And again, if this does occur, we'll let you know by blocking your IP until you petition. It's really not a big deal. We just want to make sure that you provide a reasonable quality of service and do not waste resources, because it's a terrible shame to, all that CO2 and other stuff you might be wasting. Yeah, not a big deal. So in terms of quality of service, again, it's very important to kind of remember that the API is a way of querying live data, and there is a limit to how often you can get that from a specific character. Again, it's cast on a per character or per corporation basis. We want you to use the data, but we're going to have some limitations on our back end for some reason. I mean, it would be nice if we can just have like giant server and you can just request every millisecond. It's not viable. So what we have done over the past 6 to 12 months is that we have implemented a memcached infrastructure, and I just had to include this logo because it's so awesome with like angry bunnies. It's kind of like The Office when things go wrong, actually. With like really cute things going insane, it seems. Anyway, so we couple that up with when we got the EVGate infrastructure, we borrowed a bit of space on these awesome blades. It's probably not the same blades as on the image, but they're really awesome, and they've actually improved our performance quite a bit. And then the last thing we have done is that we have put on the API tables onto one of these bastards over here on the database. We did that a couple of weeks ago, I think, and it's actually been really awesome. So yeah, now the API is served on one of these badass things, which I hope you're all enjoying, because it's like really dramatically improved the performance. Well, so I'm going to take a small leap. So we have a basic idea of what the API is, how you might query it yourself. But it's not very useful if you have to go to a web browser every minute to get some data. The user wants to somehow get that data and put it into a useful format that you can present in a UI, something like that. So we're going to have to somehow, with a bit of code, query the API and then present that to the user. We're going to do a very rough thing of that. There's people who actually spend considerable time writing libraries for you to use that will do all this thing for you. You can just make some simple calls and will magically turn up in your computer. But we're going to do it the hard way first time around, so you can get an idea of how this works. And I've written a couple of small demos to show how you might do this. So I'm going to open the first one. So what we have here, oh shit, it's not showing right. Anyway, can you guys read it at all? Yes, I can. I hope. Font.
Probably want to highlight them. No?
Yes. It's gonna, well, here we go. So this is a small Python script, and we have some imports here, which is basically like if you do C#, it's the using statement that basically imports some kind of library into your application. And then the first part we're going to do is try and create the query string parameters, and urllib in Python provides a simple way of doing it. And you basically put in the character ID, the user ID, the API key, and it's going to, well, oftentimes you're going to get this from the user input. Again, you shouldn't trust it. Then we need some headers to actually say, what kind of data we are providing, which is URL encoded form. We instantiate a connection to the EVE API EVE Online server. And then we do a request, a GET request. You can also do POST if you want to. Doesn't make a difference. Just don't do put or delete. You'll get whined at. It really doesn't make a difference, actually. Some people do POST, some do GET. It won't notice, basically.
POST is the HTTP semantic for writing stuff, isn't it?
What he says is that the post verb in HTTP is actually the way of posting or putting data into a server somehow. That's true for REST-based applications. This thing here, wait a minute. What? How the hell? Anyway, the Eve API was written before REST got all like flavor of the month, flavor of the decade almost. Doesn't use REST. Shit, this is wrong. So no, it doesn't matter. It's just basically a web front end ASPX, pretty generic. So you won't have to mind that at all that much. Anyway, so now that I think I fixed it up, so we do a request to the character sheet with our parameters and headers. We get a response, and we print the data, and then close the connection. So, sorry. Oh, that went away as well. Fuck.
Backseat drivers.
There we go. Is it right now? I hope so. Well, we'll test and see if it works. It's always nice when it throws a spanner into your works. So we go like this, execute it, and you'll see we actually get the same data as we did in the browser with all this lovely stuff and information. So that's the basic like cornerstone of an application you're going to use to actually get the data. From then on, it gets pretty interesting. So this is the trivial stuff. Then comes the stuff that's going to be, it's slightly more interesting. So we have the same piece of code here without the mistakes from the date time that was inserted. Wait a minute. And then, it's slightly off. Anyway. Let's just put it a little up here. So what we do here is that we use the minidom that Python provides, and we're going to pass the data we got from the response from the API. And this bit here, it's slightly funky. It really depends. The way this looks depends on the language you use. Python does some funky stuff where a child node in the XML, if it's just a string, it's still a node rather than a value of a node. It totally threw me off first time around, being used to the C# libraries for this. But you can see what we actually do is that we get all the results, the result elements. We get the first one, and then we get the child node from that. So what it's going to do is that it's going to go for the first element in the root, which is the result thing. Then it's going to iterate over every single one of them, and it's going to print the name of that tag, and it's going to print the node value, as you might say, of that child. So it might be easier to explain this by actually looking what it does. So we're going to go like this. So you can see what it's done is actually, can you actually read this?
Almost.
Let's see. I didn't see it.
Size.
Size.
Size is
It's just a window.
no, that's the font.
Oh, really? Fuck yeah. Wow.
We can't see structure.
Is it better to read now? Yeah, you can read it, I guess. Anyway, so what we have here is the output from the response we got, and we basically just line up, all of the values in a nice line where you can see the gender is equals to male. You have the balance, the clone skill points, and information like that. So that's very crude way of trying to actually extract the data. It works, but you're gonna, of course, have to make sure that if you throw an error, this is not gonna work. If you get an error from the API somehow, so you're gonna have to make sure to take that into consideration. Now we have a last thing, which is slightly more simple. So I wrote a small thing that's basically gonna get the data again. It's a bit longer actually, which is funny. So what it does is that it takes, you can see here, we get all the rows. If you look at the data from the API, you can see all these rows here is it says it's the skills. And you can see over here we have the skill point for each skill we have. So we can actually summarize how many skill points do I have on my character. Based on that, one thing I always do when I go out in PvP is that I forget to update my clone for some reason. and it really sucks losing my Battleship 5. So what we can do here is that we can, when we go over all of these elements, is that we can add the total skill points to a attribute, a variable, and then we can get the value for the cloned skill points by getting the elements by tag name, get the first one we find, and the node value, and then we can say you have X amount of skill points, your clone has X amount of skill points, and if you need a new clone by just comparing the values, we say you need a new clone, or otherwise your clone is fine, but don't get potted anyway. So if we try and run this, I don't know what it is, but my font on this finger looks really weird. No, that's not going to work. So we run this, and this is going to get the result. So you can see you have 831,000 skill points on the character. Not a whole lot. Still a rifter you can fly. And the clone has 900,000. So in fact, this clone is fine. If it wasn't fine, it will tell you, and you should probably go and buy a clone. It's a very simple way of showing that you can take some very simple things and utilize it for improving your experience and maybe making yourself your life a little bit easier. So you can create a small thing that monitors your clone, and if you somehow forget in the heat of a battle to upgrade your clone, it will pop up and tell you, which is really neat. So yeah, it's very simple parsing. You're not going to do anything like this because it was really bad. But it shows for the purpose of this demo how you might go about it. Again, there is third-party libraries you can use that will make your life a lot simpler, and they're actually really good. So yeah, you might consider using those. So wrapping a bit up, we have gone over how to get data, how to get the API key, how to parse that very simply. I mentioned earlier that with the full unlimited API key, that's going to go away at some point. And just to give you the very simple version of what we're doing is that we're doing customizable API keys. That means you can create your own API keys with customized access levels. So you can say, maybe I don't want to give away my mails, but I do want to give away my character sheet to Eatmon. And you can, of course, have several of these for different applications. One thing that we always said is that I'm a director in a corporation. My API key, because of the fact that the way to get corporation data is by giving away the key of a director. That's suicide for any sort of large-scale corporation. So what we're doing is that we are splitting that from the character keys. So we're creating the idea of a character key and a corporation key. And then we're going to allow any director or CEO to actually create this key and give that away. It's only going to have the corporation data. So the way it's going to work is that as you've seen, we used to have the user ID and the API key for all authenticated calls. The way it's going to be is that we have a key ID, which is generated magically on the server. And then you're going to provide, or you're going to generate on the page, a verification code. It can't be user-defined, as I said. And implicitly from that, when you create a key, there can be an expiration time. It might be optional. You can get an unlimited one, potentially. Still slightly to be decided, but it's something we're leaning towards. And then, yeah, if you, for instance, you're trying to get a recruiter into a corporation, they need to do a spy check. You don't want them to have your API key forever, potentially. So you can just generate one that's going to last for a day, for instance. And then you can give it to them and just know that they're not going to be able to use the API key in 24 hours, which is a really neat thing to allow people to use the API more without taking all the risks of exposing your data and losing the API key to bad people. So yeah, that's the very simple version of what the API is, how we use it. We have the word I cannot use, in here. It actually, if you were to go to the wiki and try and find it, it's actually slightly hard. So just try and remember this URL. You can't. We have third-party documentation as well, which is really awesome. The wiki on eve-id.net, which is very well maintained and it's actually pretty good. And they have a channel on IC which has been pimped a few times, eve-dev on Coldfront. A lot of third-party developers hang out there, and they're a really good resource if you need any kind of help. We have the dev blog on the customizable API keys, which PrismX wrote. Some changes have been made since then, but once we get closer to that, we'll of course make sure that you know about the latest changes. We have the Eve Technology Forum, which is where all the third-party developers hang out and discuss the API and things like that. And then of course we had third-party libraries to allow you to write API keys easily. So yeah, at this point we have gone through the conceptual idea of the API. We have querying data from the live cluster, how keys work, how to get access to non-authenticator data. Did I say that? And then how to get your API key and use it to get character-specific data. And we, of course, just did some simple data parsing. And hopefully at this point that it's the case that you can, well, you need to come up with some ideas for what to use this for. It's a very powerful tool, and there's a lot of things that are not really tapped into yet. For instance, I haven't, there's really no application that just goes and checks, is your clone up to date? It would be neat rather than having like a giant application that does that. And then you can, if you're new to this, you can pick up a third-party library, as I said, and just start hacking away at it. And eventually, there is a chance that you might come up with something really neat that can make life in New Eden more enjoyable, not just for yourself, but other users as well. And you can share the love a little bit. So yeah, that's really all for now. So I guess we'll open up the floor for questions.
I guess it's just more of a comment. If you do a search on any search engine to say EVE Online API documentation,
right,
it takes you to EVE-Online/API/doc,
yes,
which says this is the documentation index. If you're looking for your API key, go here, and then there's a big blank page. So I assume you're aware of that, but you should probably fix that.
Shit. Yeah, here it is. This is the old documentation. It's not there anymore. So actually,
we should fix that.
We did. So this is the set of document pages for the works of API. We actually, what was the case was that we had old documentation here. We removed that and moved it onto the wiki, and then just removed all mentions of the documentation, it seems. The link is in the slides, if you can get hold of those. Yeah. Yes, I agree. We're gonna make sure.
Maybe you should put a link to Coldfront.
Yeah, so the channel is actually not in Fanfest community. So we have this thing over here, which actually links to the channel. And this is also where you get the static data dump that PrismX told about.
Yeah, not very into it.
Yeah, but
Welcome to Eve, sir.
this is something we'll need to change.
But I just want to make sure that you're...
Awesome, thank you. No, listen.
I was wondering when the new API key system goes into place, are you just going to shut off the old version, or is it just going to be deprecated temporarily until, or are they going to run in parallel for a while, or are you going to just like let old apps still live, use the old system, and then like what is kind of the plan for migration of that?
So it's not totally set in stone, but one thing we will make sure of is that old application doesn't break. It's a very big change, so there's a lot of people who's going to have to change applications, and we totally recognize that. So it's probably going to be the case, and I'm just speculating, it's not totally in stone, but we're going to be running the APIs in parallel. So you're going to be able to request the API, the old API, and then if you need to access the new API, you can just go to a different URL and get a new one.
Yeah, we've been really bad with backwards compatibility.
Yes.
And I'm aware of that, and we intend to change that.
Yeah, especially some developers don't really have the time
to
get right on that. So
I do have a question querying data from the server.
Right.
What is the limit until I get blacklisted? And I mean, is that how many calls can I make? And is that actually shared? Is, for example, if I query not always the same page but different pages?
You're gonna have to go very insane.
Okay. So give me a number. I can do that. I have an additional question.
I mean, you want,
There's no actual magical number we can give you. It differentiates between calls. If you're doing a lot of heavy calls and you're doing them wrong and you're causing us errors, that's going to be way worse than if you're doing 10 times more of proper calls.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. And an additional question: are there any XSD files available to, just verify that the data I get actually is conformed to what EVE XML should look like?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
About the new keys, there would be very nice to have an API call that would just say this key works for so and so long, and it gives you access to these calls.
I believe that's the plan.
Yeah.
This guy over here would know.
Yeah, I don't think the dev blog actually says that, but it was. It's obvious that you need that. There's no way of actually doing any meaningful calls with the API key if you don't know what you can do with it. Then you're just going to error constantly, and we're going to ban you.
A whole new form of griefing.
For the new key, is there going to be like a test site because obviously the new one won't be up here?
There is definitely going to be before we launch it to the live cluster, we're going to make sure to test it extensively and open up to public testing. So we'll definitely have a chance before it goes live to actually make sure your application can use it, and yeah.
Sorry, I'll come back to you.
There was a dev blog a while ago about hitting the API with invalid API keys and trying to tell people to stop it. I want to know whether that also continues onto account status, that people are having active accounts, or are they still classified as valid API calls?
I mean, we're not going to take actions against anybody who doesn't really, mess up. If you are requesting like once now and it's invalid because you forgot to turn off your EVE-mon, we really don't care.
Well, it's more that we've got 3,500 API keys to update.
Right, as long as you're grateful about it, you'll be fine. Obviously, if you're going to dump them all at once and do it every hour, and you don't remove the API key from your rotation of calls, eventually, it will add up, and it's going to be enough that we'll maybe have a say.
Oh, there's more an issue with people passing in, negative user IDs and stuff like that. I don't really like when you look over this error log. It's obvious nobody's trying to brute force up any API keys or anything. They're just doing really weird things that will never work and repeatedly over and over again. And we don't know how to deal with that except just block them until they ask us why.
Small suggestion there. I noticed for the authentication error, you were giving a cached until of about 5 minutes. I would raise it to a day or something, because then you have client implementations that respect cached until, handle that error in a sane way automatically.
We should actually cache errors for like eons or something. That's a good idea.
A bit like the skill tree.
There was a hand somewhere here.
Will the new API stuff affect the public APIs? So the APIs which you have to query without an API key, like map data and whatever.
We're actually thinking about requiring a API key there, just to show that you're actually a user or a subscriber to EVE, so that not everybody in the world can be hammering us for that, but it's not going to require any sort of authentication to it or anything. Does that answer your question? Okay, there was no other hands up here? Moving back over there.
From a non-developer point of view, there's an importance that how you make those new API keys is as user-friendly as possible. Now, as basically just for recruitment purposes of rather new players, I'm having like 4 out of 7 applications. They have their API key, but not the user ID, and vice versa. So then just adding complexity into what they are going to allow that API key to do, I'm worried about that.
Right. So the first point
one of my suggestions would be we can, as a corporation, say we need access to this, and then they hit the apply button, and it generates an API key for that, and it gets concatenated into the application.
Yes. So when we pitched this idea to our senior producer, CCP Sulapark, that was one of the first things he said as well, some kind of way of creating a template or predefined access levels. And it's something that we're going to do as well, I believe.
I think he's talking about, though, creating like so they can create a link to our account page so that when the user clicks that, he'll log in with the proper template set up.
The question is how you get that template. And we can do that.
No, I mean, you're asking so that you can customize that link so that it'll bring up the actual API key you need.
It's all done in game, for example, that we as a corporation do this backend, and when they apply, they get like a pop-up and saying you're giving access to this, and it's going to live for so long. Is this okay? And yeah, and just push it over.
Right.
Yeah, I am no usability expert. I'll freely admit that. I do horrible UIs like any other programmer, but it is something we're aware of. We're not going to release it, so it is more complicated for people. We will think about it, but we also need to get this done.
You're actually thinking of when you apply for a corporation in-game, that we would actually go and create the API key as a part of that process, not only send in the corporation application. Okay.
Seems like you get your corporation members some bad habits, right? Just like, oh yeah, here, just believe what we're telling you. Sure, go ahead and give us an API key. We're only going to have
trust everything.
So long. Go ahead, we believe you.
This is CCP Explorer, by the way, my boss and the boss of my boss. Any more questions? Yep, something over there and there.
Let me just go back. The account status.
Yes.
On the documentation, you're saying returns basic information such as when the subscription lapses. Does that come back as a number of days until or a date at which it expires?
I believe it's a date time.
Thank you.
Just more of almost a suggestion on templating of access to the new calls. One way you could probably quite easily do it would be to allow a sort of template parameter to the page where you generate the key, and have that being a short string that another page could generate, and that would be effectively a bitmap of what calls are required.
I've put some thought into this, but sadly we haven't had the time to actually start development on this. But yeah, we are fully aware of we're not going to make it harder for people to use. We hope.
Hope.
I just hope you won't get angry at me when I would just put the word OAuth into the room. Because that's a thing what many users and many web applications are using. For example, if you're on Facebook and you want to give access to your account to one of those Facebook applications who just want to spam your broadcast or your status feed, your status updates, they will just come up with, do you want to give access to this and this and this for this application? And you just press yes or no. It would be the same for Twitter. Twitter allows you to post updates as well, and they're using OAuth as well. Google is using OAuth as well if you want to access their calendar and their email and contact stuff. So many big business applications are using the same stuff. And what I would suggest is use OAuth for authentication, and in the same progress the web developer requests access to certain levels of the user's API stuff. After that, you create an API key for that application, return the API key as access token, and then the application can just use the normal API and do whatever they want. And if the user don't like the application anymore, he just revoke that API key and he's done. And just use the OAuth progress to exchange the API keys. That would help web applications, corporate websites, tools, and whatever on the internet would really big help and even desktop applications support OAuth. So that would be a very good idea, and if you want to see it, I can show you what's currently looking like on the internet.
Non, do you want to answer this? Because I'm not really sure what I can say.
So I'm not familiar myself with different forms of authentication, but there are in the works some changes to the API, and in particular to the way that we authenticate. But those are not going to happen like in the short term, but maybe next year.
So for me, for the current API to be wasting time on putting this extra OAuth layer on top of the other customizable API keys means that you people have to wait longer for them. The API will not be used as much in the meantime. And in the end, there's just a lot of time gone into doing something that's going to die out anyway.
It wouldn't be an extra layer, basically. You just work on the API as you already do, and if you're done with the API, you just add this OAuth authentication stuff on top. So just for the key exchange, not more, just for authentication in the key exchange.
You might just want to take this to the roundtable, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. But if it's so simple, then we just do the customizable API keys. If it's 5 lines of code on top of that, then there's no issue about it. If it's not, then we still have the customizable API keys, and I think it's the best for everybody, in my opinion. But any more questions on this side, or before I move over there? Nope.
I was wondering if any thought had been possibly given to something like a cross-account API key. So say I have, 2 mains on 2 separate accounts, but like say I want Evemon or something just to, I just want to give it one key. I don't want to have to go get a user ID key for one character and a user ID for another character, put them together. With the new API system, has that been something that's been thought about?
That's a great idea for spying. I love that.
Actually, that's the reason for the possibility of the user input for the verification code. So you can have multiple, unique identifiers for each key, but then you can share the same access code between them. So you only have to specify like one API key, really, and then just multiple unique identifiers.
So will you be able to limit it to a single character? Because a lot of times when you apply and now you give it a limited key, they can see all 3 characters. So you'll be able to limit to just one character.
We do intend to allow you to make a character-specific API key so that no other information except that character's information is accessible. However, we'll probably also provide corporations with a way of seeing this is a character-bound API key. This person might be hiding something from you, but we're not going to tell you what you're hiding.
As a director, and with that, no worry. I remember before the API, and people were demanding screenshots of your login and all your characters. It would be nice to not go back to that.
Like I said, you will be able to say, we want your full user-based API key, and you'll be able to verify whether you got that API key. If you don't get that API key, I am not going to expose any more information than the account owner decided that he wanted to expose to you, but you will be able to see whether he is trying to hide something from you or not. Any further questions? Doesn't look like it.
In front of you.
Is there any timeline on paging or filtering of remote results? For example, like the jumps list, is it possible to filter that by region? Just as an example of a huge result set that never really, well, it seems to go on forever.
We don't actually have any plans to do that, no. I mean, the API backlog is full of, wish feature lists, and the API code itself is very old and full of technical debt. We kind of have to pick and choose, and it's really only me and Stillman, but I'll try and put some more work into it. Maybe we can get more awesome stuff in there.
Front.
What sort of skills would you be looking for in an extra member of your team?
That guy down there. Hi.
So I'll go and collar him after this session.
Yeah, we can't really speak to human resources or anything like that. Sorry.
do you guys have any plans on allowing more filters for RP queries so that I can limit my result sets? Let's say, for example, market orders. Currently, you get all your market orders you ever have, expired or not. So if I'm just interested in my active market orders, I'll add a flag to the query, and you're done with it.
Can we? It's a good idea, but can we move on any feature requests or anything to the roundtable we'll have in a bit? So just keep generic API questions here. We are running out of time, and I'd like to get some coffee. Any more questions here about the API itself? Did you raise your hand, sir?
Hey, do you want to table coffee?
Sorry?
Nobody?
All right. Cool. Thanks.